Thank you, Chairman Dush. Acting Secretary Schmidt, it's good to see you again. Want to chat a little bit about Act 88 of 2022 legislation that I sponsored alongside Senator Lisa Baker to ban outside third-party dark money from funding the administration of our elections. Genesis of that bill was a massive influx of last-minute funding from a group known as the Center for Tech and Civic Life. And the goal of the legislation really was to rid our elections process of this funding, because while in this past election it seemed that those grants were heavily skewed toward Democratic counties, we knew that Republican-leading organizations could try to do the exact opposite in a future election. However, upon review of the department's website, I found a video embedded on the post-election audits page from none other than the Center for Tech and Civic Life. And after watching that video, it provides additional resources like how to work with the media and educating and persuading public officials. You made a statement I couldn't agree with more when you talked about registering voters better done by the Commonwealth than a third-party entity with certain preferences. I may have paraphrased that as I wrote down your quote. I appreciate greatly the effort to educate the public on these processes. But can you pledge to us that we will finally rid our election administration of this group, really, and any others the department is resourcing for voting and election duties once and for all?
Yes, and thanks to Act 88, with the resources provided to the counties so that they can better run elections. As you know, there have been so many changes recently over the years, and the introduction of mail-in ballot voting, which is not only a heavy lift, but in the 2020 environment resulted in us going from a very negligible number of votes cast by absentee ballot to nearly 50% of our votes in the Commonwealth cast by mail-in ballot. And all of the equipment and all of the sort of operational changes that had to take place to accommodate that heavy lift. And fortunately, with Act 88, counties are able to use resources to pay for many of the other things that they need to conduct elections. Everything from which also HAVA has been helpful paying for in the past as well. Really, anything related to election administration is better when you're spending public dollars. And thanks to Act 88, private dollars are no longer a concern.
Well, and I appreciate that, and certainly I think that elections are a key function of government. But part of Act 88, and you kind of touched on this a little bit, maybe you can expand for me. Each county is required to report on what I would argue are pro-election integrity measures to assure that all voters meet 6 requirements, and they have to report, and that report must show that counties followed appropriate procedures related to approval of voter registration applications, cancellation of deceased electors, voter removal programs, safekeeping of voted ballots, enforcement of voter ID requirements, and canvassing of absentee and mail-in ballots. These reports are available on your website. So first I want to say kudos to your team for providing that layer of transparency to the public. And I noted that in the 75-day report from 2022, only Clarion County spelled out the steps that the county took to meet all 6 of the requirements. Clarion did an exceptional job. So my question to you is, what checks are in place to make sure that the counties are following the letter of the law with regard to Act 88 and these 6 requirements?
And what you just described, I think, would be obviously a great comfort if more counties did that.
Absolutely.
We should explore a way to convince the counties, if it's not required in Act 88 to spell out exactly what you described that Clarion did, if we can help guide them or assist them in completing those reporting to be more comprehensive. Like Clarion.
And I think it was in Act 88. I think they really met the letter of the law. Anything to encourage other counties to be as transparent and accountable would be greatly appreciated. On the issue of reports, if I may, Mr. Chairman, risk limiting audits and post-election audits. Certain counties piloted those risk limiting audits. And now you are 2 election cycles into a statewide rollout of risk limiting audits, one of which was under your own oversight. In your role, have you seen an improvement to the post-election and risk limiting audit process? And are there areas that you and your team see opportunities for improvement in that process?
I think, and Philadelphia was one of the counties that piloted risk limiting audits, along with, I think, 2 others. So it is something that I've been familiar with for a little while now. We had almost all of the counties comply. This last election, there was one with a misunderstanding that believed that only counties that receive Act 88 money would have to conduct risk limiting audits. So we have to make clear to the counties their obligation to conduct risk limiting audits, whether they accept Act 88 taxpayer resources or not.
Okay. And finally, if I may, Mr. Chairman, just a follow-up on the chairman's question with regard to voting machines. So once approved under state law, changes to a voting machine don't have to be re-examined or reapproved if the change, and I quote, does not impair its accuracy, efficiency, or capacity, or its compliance with the requirements. So essentially, it says a voting machine does not have to be re-examined after it is changed if the changes are minor. So the department has made a lot of tweaks to the post-election audit process. However, there's not a lot said on voting machines. So who determines whether a change to the voting machine impairs its accuracy, efficiency, or compliance?
The Department of State would make that assessment if the modification to the voting system did in any way impact the items that you described. If they, change the size of the wheels on the voting machine that's rolled out, that would not require recertification. But if they're changing some other aspect of it that would be more significant, then Department of State would re-examine the machines.
So we're verifying the nature of any changes,
We are.
right? So if it has to do with some sort of processor within the system versus the wheels or the type of metal used, or
Right.
Okay. So we're not just taking the vendor's word for it.
No, not at all.
Okay. Okay. Very good. Thank you. Thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chairman.